For more on this, let's bring in Fox Sports news reporter Drew Jones. Drew, it was extraordinary. I saw reports of it. I had to get on and watch, and I was staggered, some of the things said. Claiming mental health, and a lack of soft cap and lack of support for the players, that is legitimate in some areas, but all that was reported was a player wasn't going to be in the side, as far as we know, is for form, and somehow that was gutter journalism.
Yeah, Tom, good morning. Things got a little bit wild in the press conference, that's for sure. And at times, Bevo did almost feel like he was rambling a little bit. And I think there's a lot that has built up with his frustrations from within the AFL right now and the way that the game is being reported on. And there is an even bigger backstory to this, in that Tom reported that Ryan Gardner was dropped by the Western Bulldogs in grand final week. That was, again, a correct report. And Luke wasn't happy about that. And then the next time the two teams play and the next time the Bulldogs play, he again wants to reference Tom's reporting of a selection story, this time around Lachie Hunter, who was told in the lead up to the game that he wasn't going to be playing, and then he ends up back in the team as a sub. Then a late withdrawal means that he actually ends up starting the game. So things were complex, and their relationship is complex. And then Tom was instructed to go to the press conference, and he's absolutely entitled to be there. And then things got a little bit heated and clearly out of hand. I spoke to a couple of coaches this morning. Obviously, they're not keen to comment on what transpired and how it unfolded, and you can understand why they'd want to separate themselves from the situation. I've spoken to the Western Bulldogs as well, Tom. They've been locked in meetings this morning, basically discussing how to handle the fallout from this. I mean, it actually helps them that there's a game tonight and there's still 8 games to go in round 1. There's a lot of footy to be played, and that's going to be talked about, and in some ways will overshadow the incident. But ultimately, Tom Morris was right. His reporting was correct. He was doing his job, and he was perfectly entitled to be at that press conference and do everything that he had done. Unfortunately, Luke Beveridge was out of line on this occasion, and maybe, yes, we do have a conflict of interest here because Tom Morris is a colleague and it's Fox Sports and Fox Footy that's involved. But ultimately, I think we can safely say, regardless of our biases, that Tom was in the right and Luke was in the wrong.
Well, yeah, we'll always be upfront around our affiliation. That's fine, and people should know that, so it's a good point to make. But let's just be clear about what we're talking about. We're talking about, reports of who's in and out of a side. For people that don't follow footy, they go, well, who cares? For people that follow footy, that's bread and butter. It's what fans want to know. It was a big story in the grand final. And for that crime, at one stage, Luke Beveridge was suggesting he couldn't come to press conferences anymore. And Tom Morris pointed out, guess what? These are AFL press conferences. And then Luke Beveridge left.
Yeah, well, I guess ultimately someone was going to have to extricate themselves from the situation because it was getting quite heated, and the AFL official that was there was sort of urging Luke and Tom to move on to the next question and to continue the press conference. I think the way that Luke continued to want to go back and have these discussions with Tom, which was essentially a one-way conversation. He wasn't really allowing Tom to have a rebuttal and to speak and to have a conversation. I think we can all agree this was a conversation that needed to happen behind closed doors, and a public dressing down of Tom was completely inappropriate, especially when he's referencing mental health. And there is some stuff with Lachie Hunter behind the scenes, who's been through a little bit over the last couple of years. And I know the Dogs are protective of Lachie Hunter. And so that in particular, I think, would have riled up the Dogs behind closed doors. And again, it's not something that we heard in the short clip that you played there, Tom, but there was talk about the fact that there's a leak at the Western Bulldogs, and that was what led to Ryan Gardner's selection news coming out in grand final week, that leak. And then another leak leads to Lachie Hunter, his place in the side, that ultimately, again, that story was correct. Beveridge referenced that and said, well, we've got an issue. And that's something that clearly has riled him up. But he's shooting the messenger. He's taking out his frustrations on Tom when there's other issues at play at the Dogs.
Yeah, and let's not, conflate mental health. It is a serious issue in all workplaces, but when you report ahead of time that someone's going to be out of a team, well, that was going to be reported anyway. So it's not like they could have, shielded Lachie Hunter from the decision that he wasn't playing. Anyway, Drew, thank you for that. It's an issue that's getting huge attention. We'll see what the response from the Western Bulldogs is.